Perhaps we don't want to go so far as to claim that women benefited from the Depression. They certainly did not. But it isn't too much to say that the economic downturn hurt men in some ways more than it did women, for many reasons. First, and perhaps most importantly, the decline affected men's jobs more quickly than those of women. By 1933, 13 million people, almost a quarter of the workforce, were unemployed. But because job losses in men's work, extracting raw materials, steel manufacture, tin, construction, and basic manufacturing, exceeded job losses in women's work, and because these industries were slow to recover, men faced unemployment faster and for longer than women. Besides, as New Deal programs began to move forward after 1933, the expanding bureaucracy demanded increasing numbers of female workers. For once, occupational segregation may have benefited women. The majority still worked in the clerical and service sectors where they had made places for themselves in the 20s and where unmanly jobs didn't appeal to men. A quarter of all women wage earners worked in manufacturing, to be sure, but even there, women rarely worked side by side with men. A few men invaded the precincts of social workers, librarians, and teachers, but pink-collar office and sales work, nursing, and domestic labor all remained primarily the provinces of women. The effect on families was devastating. In those days, most white families and a large percentage of black families relied on male breadwinners, even if women pitched in to earn extra income as necessary. Many, perhaps most men and women, still believed in male breadwinning, and women hoped, if they married and had children, to be able to rear them at home. That posed something of a conundrum. Unemployment turned previously fixed expectations upside down. Many women who fervently believed in male breadwinning or hoped to benefit from it could not afford to stay at home. Other women who believed in women's independence found jobs no longer open to them. But the Depression, which so quickly undermined male provider roles, proved particularly devastating for masculine identities. No longer able to support families and not wanting to burden them, men deserted in unprecedented numbers. Some of the unemployed took to alcohol. Some took to the rails, preferring to tramp rather than to be a burden on their families. The marriage rate as a whole declined as young men found themselves supporting parents or siblings, nor could they afford to start their own families while they were providing for others. When young people married, they sometimes doubled up in housing, living with parents or with siblings if necessary, in order to make ends meet. Not surprisingly, birth rates as a result plummeted down from 100 live births per 1,000 women at the turn of the century to 74 live births per 1,000 women in the 1930s. If men felt increasingly useless, respect for them declined. Women, the married as well as the unmarried, began to wonder what a man was worth. Increasingly, they stayed in their jobs or sought paid work out of absolute necessity. The shift in the dynamic of wage earning wreaked havoc on family life and on the idea of the family. Women who'd worked out of economic necessity found their paths to marriage closed, as men, devastated by the crisis and who could no longer support women, simply walked away from marriage. A woman who had entered the labor force thinking that she might work 4 or 5 or even 7 years before marriage rescued her from a poorly paid job now discovered that she would have to stay in the wage labor force for the foreseeable future. If they were lucky enough to still have jobs, the women who had worked for the joy and freedom of it in the 1920s now found themselves supporting whole families, no longer working for their economic independence or for the satisfaction of work. The experience brought them closer to that of African American women. More than a third of African American women had been in the labor force on a routine basis even before the Depression. That number did not rise very much, but neither did it decline. On the contrary, those women who remained in the labor force found themselves domino-like pushed out of reasonable jobs and into day labor, sometimes into seeking jobs that would last just 2 or 3 hours in a day. In the Bronx, New York, women stood on street corners every morning looking for somebody who would employ them. The potential employer might offer a minimal wage or an hour or 2 of work and food for the woman and her family. With good fortune, a needy woman might get a whole day's work and a reasonable wage. Even then, she was forced to return the next day and seek work on the same corner. Potential workers understood the phenomenon as a slave market, and it has become known as such to historians. In this photograph, you can see women on the corner, and next to them a group of men who, likewise, waited for jobs, often in the construction trades.